Hello. Okay. Sorry about that, y'all. I'm having a little challenge with my connection, but I think we're good now. Trying again, getting our panels on the stage. There we go. Sorry about that. I'm like, what is going on with my connection? Maybe I need a new phone. There we go. All right. Here we go. Welcome. My name's Tia. I haven't had a chance to meet y'all live and face to face just yet. I'm the senior strategist with Build Power and the moderator for Get Free Fridays, i.e., the tech person. And we're just waiting for Jamila to join us and we'll get started. Let me see. I don't see her in the chat just yet, but that's okay. Because maybe she was like me and her internet connection was acting funny. Welcome, y'all. If this is your first time joining Get Free Fridays, let us know in the chat. If you are back again because you love it so much, let me know in the chat. Here comes Jamila. Yay, there we go. Look at us, head wrap twins.
Imagine.
Always in sync. Alrighty, so I had a little bit of trouble getting on, so I want to be careful not to mess anything up. I'm gonna put my phone down and I'm gonna turn it over after I talk a little bit about Build Power. Hey everybody, my name is Tia Osa. I'm the senior strategist of Build Power. We are a culture strategy and social impact organization that works to shine the bright light on the grassroots leadership of folks working for racial justice, freedom, and liberation. And we do our work through our abolitionist lens. We're doing the Get Free Friday summer school series in partnership with the People's Coalition for Safety and Freedom, each week highlighting the work of organizers and activists and leaders all across the country in their work to repeal and replace the 1994 crime bill as part of the People's Coalition. And so this week we're going to be talking about the Violence Against Women Act. I asked my friend and sister comrade, Jamil Limyo, to lead us in our discussion with our fabulous freedom fighting sisters and siblings on the call with us today. She's on the IG Live with us today. I'm usually on Zoom doing this. So I'm going to turn it over to Jamila to take it away.
Thank you, Tia, and thank you for having me. So Build Power is halfway through their Get Free Friday, their Get Free Friday Freedom Summer School series. So thank you to those of you who've tuned in, and thank you to everyone who's tuned in today. They've had some incredible conversations with dope activists, and there's more to come. As you know, the focus has been on the 1994 crime bill, which is a notorious driver of mass incarceration in the United States. And after over 30 years, it continues to target and devastate Black and Brown communities across the country. So today we're talking about the Violence Against Women Act. And a lot of people don't really know how to feel about the Violence Against Women Act. When you hear that language, the first thing you think is that this must be something that is going to protect women. This is something that is going to protect victims. And in theory, one would love to believe that a Violence Against Women Act would effectively protect survivors. But instead, what it has done is continue to fuel mass incarceration, and it is approached violence. It has approached ending violence in a way that has begat more violence, and Black and Brown communities have been particularly targeted for that violence. VAWA has pumped billions of dollars into the police departments, courts, and prosecutors' offices by adding federal adding more federal crimes for intimate partner violence. VAWA made it effectively so that survivors of abuse have no choice but to interact with the police, which we know for survivors of abuse is a very, at best, mixed bag of experiences. And guess what? Quite often, the perpetrators of domestic and physical abuse against women are police officers themselves. VAWA also demonstrates extreme bias along racial, ethnic, and class lines. It discriminates against trans, gender nonconforming, and queer people. The poster child for VAWA has become a middle-class white woman, and essentially anyone who doesn't fit that profile is excluded by what this legislation has done. So I'm so honored to be joined by Amber and Dawn to talk further about VAWA and the ways that advocates are creating alternatives to end intimate partner violence. So welcome. So glad to have you both here. Would you be willing to introduce yourselves? And we'll start with you, Amber.
Sure. Thanks for having me. So my name is Amber Akemi Pyatt. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I work at a national organization called Human Impact Partners. We work to transform the field of public health to center equity and to build power, collective power with social justice movements, and we're a proud member of the People's Coalition for Safety and Freedom.
Thank you. And Dawn?
Hi, my name is Dawn Harrington. I am the executive director of Free Hearts in Tennessee, and I'm also the director of special projects at the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls. And in both of those organizations, I'm organizing with incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women and girls.
Dawn, how did you get involved in this work, and how has the Violence Against Women Act impacted you and the work that you do?
Yeah, so I got into this work basically from being incarcerated. I used to be working in the music industry, and one time when we were doing a work trip, I was arrested for having a gun, which it was legal where I lived, but it wasn't legal in the state of New York. And actually I had just got out of a violent relationship, and I felt that's what I needed to protect myself at the time. And, you know, when I went through the criminal legal process, no one asked or said, you know, well, why did you feel like you had the need to have a gun or anything like that? You know, it was just mostly about, it was, you know, just, we're going to have to hold you accountable. Ignorance to the law is not a defense, you know, and it was just, you know, I just felt like they just kept trying to paint me in the worst light ever and not even caring about what I went through. So actually, after I was already convicted, people at home telling me, you know, you let them railroad you and, you know, different things like that. And so I was trying to figure out, you know, what I could do to maybe get a better sense before I had to turn myself in. And I know, like, they kept saying, well, I was denied for the diversion options that were available because I had a quote violent charge. And so it wasn't until, you know, the last thing that I tried was to write a letter to the judge who really talked about me in a bad light a lot of times in open court. And, you know, just really tell her about some of the trauma that I experienced, about, you know, just getting out of that relationship. And from that, she still wanted me to do time, but she wanted me to do less time than I was about to turn myself in to do. And so it made me have to do what's considered a city year on this island, which I guess was the compromise in her mind. But from that incarceration, you know, I thought I knew everything about incarceration from my brother being formerly incarcerated and other family members and friends. But just being in the women's facility, seeing the impact on family, on our sisters and siblings, it really just inspired me to want to start an organization, Free Hearts, when I got out. So when I got out, once I got some space to breathe, I got with some other folks who had the same experience of incarceration, and we just started organizing together from there.
That's amazing. Thank you.
Incredible.
Amber, how did you get started with this work?
Yeah, first, just thank you so much for sharing that, Dawn, and for all the amazing, amazing work that you do in Tennessee and beyond. Definitely a longtime admirer of your work. Yeah, in reflecting on this question just now, I can tell you a sort of tidy story in retrospect, but I think the truth is that my life and my life's work has sort of unfolded and is unfolding in really circuitous ways. So if we maybe start the timeline in my early 20s, I was largely spending my time in two spaces then. So one was providing direct services and mental health, especially for young people who were experiencing trauma, and also doing quite a bit of political education in feminist spaces. And after a few years of doing that, I was feeling pretty burned out. I was struggling with vicarious trauma. And I ended up going back to grad school in public health in 2013 to learn about how we could approach violence as a public health issue, which was something I had read on some CDC website and felt compelled by. And, what that meant to me was really thinking about structural solutions that didn't blame victims and really thinking about addressing the root causes of what drive violence. And I so happened to be in school and organizing with Black women and other women of color on campus when the Ferguson uprisings began. And in that time, after a lot of political education myself and a lot of soul searching, I really had to think for myself about whether I was more interested in punishing people who have caused harm, or if I was more interested in making space for those people's healing in service of preventing further violence, right? And so after some serious grappling with that, I ended up getting involved with non-police responses to sexual violence on campus in particular. And so, many years into this work now, I can sort of, in retrospect, look back and understand the ways that my work then and my work today really approaching state violence prevention, shifting from interpersonal violence prevention to state violence prevention with an abolitionist politic and lens. I can see how that, for example, is really helping me heal my own personal wounds, including intergenerational wounds, as a person whose family was incarcerated in World War II simply for being Japanese American, and having that incarceration story be part of my family's intergenerational story for the last 3+ generations.
Dawn, can you talk about why the Violence Against Women Act is so, no pun intended, violent?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, the way it's called Violence Against Women Act, it is rather confusing, as you mentioned in the intro. But I think that and I think it's important to recognize too, there's some parts of VAWA that have been helpful as far as like housing, giving people access to green cards. And also that since some of the recertifications, they've expanded to have supports and resources for different identities and indigenous people and tribal nations, LGBTQ folks, immigrants. But the response is overwhelmingly, it's expanded more to be a little bit less like this, but not much at all. And it's definitely mostly under the scope of the criminal legal system, which is like the most violent and super violent. And it's very problematic for marginalized survivors. And I think it's important to also name there, during the time of its passage, there was an advance warning by feminists of color that already, had that self-fulfilling prophecy that this was going to harm certain communities, like the Black community, like communities of color, and other marginalized communities as well. In an article in '94, Marie Matsuda basically questioned why feminists would embrace a carceral solution to intimate partner violence without critique, and also partner with law enforcement. So I think, what VAWA did in the time and still now, like, answered legitimate call for like healing intergenerational trauma, healing interpersonal violence, things that the feminist movement was really calling for, but with a carceral response, which is violence, within and of itself. And yeah, so that's why I think it's violent. And just basically the funding the dramatic expansion of the criminal legal system, through these grants, basically support the development and implementation of these strategies that had to include law enforcement, had to include prosecutors, had to include court. And it basically ensured that criminalization is the primary response to violence, when we know that increased criminalization and increased incarceration does not equate to a reduction in violence.
Amber, can you break down how VAWA forces survivors to interact with law enforcement?
Yeah, so I think, one, I just want to plus one everything that Dawn said. And I think that we can think of this a few ways. So one is that VAWA, creates and reinforces many pathways to police contact. But for one, violence, of course, can totally upend your life. And it can make it impossible or difficult to go to work, not to mention that some forms of abuse include financial control. It can be noisy in nature and might alert your neighbors. And because of nuisance laws and the ways that noise is criminalized in residential spaces, that can create another pathway. It can result in the need for healthcare, including emergency healthcare, which is incredibly expensive in this country, and more. And so in order to receive certain protections or benefits, such as protection from eviction, some places and services actually require that you submit a police report to prove that you are experiencing violence. So that's one main pathway. And maybe a second that I would highlight is that in yet another assault to survivors' autonomy and privacy, many officials and professionals are what are called mandated reporters. And those can include therapists, doctors, teachers. And so for those people, if they hear about you experiencing violence, they are required to report that by law. And of course, some of this is misunderstood, and people can certainly they have discretion in what they are choosing to report and not even within the context of this mandated reporting. But the point is that survivors may be turning to people for care, for a kind ear, for a shoulder to cry on, but may actually wind up being funneled to the police involuntarily by seeking that kind of support.
Dawn, survivors, particularly survivors of color, find themselves in a very difficult situation, grappling with whether to engage law enforcement or not. Can you talk about some of the options that exist for someone who's been a victim of intimate partner violence, who does not want to engage with law enforcement, but who needs help and support?
Yeah, and I think this is a really good question. I can give my own example as like the first example. And I think also that this is a larger, like, ongoing question as well. But in my situation, I had one like incident of violence. I was in a relationship with someone that it was a secret. No one like knew. We worked together, we lived together. They thought we were just best friends, and that's how I wanted it to be. Well, the incident happened, and I was like, okay, I don't want to get killed anymore. I don't want to kill nobody. I still love the person. I didn't want them to have to go to jail. But I'm like, something is going to change. I have to figure out something. So I reached out to a woman that I was working for, who was also a friend. And I, just basically, the next morning told her this is something that happened. We were in a relationship. I know you didn't know that, but I need to get up out of here because, it's going to go down. Like it's either one way or the other, it's going down. And so, you know, within less than an hour, she was there to pick me up and I had a place to go. And I like to give that example because in that situation, the person didn't die, I didn't die, neither one, no police was involved, and really it was like my sister that really came and got me. And not saying and that's the example to like cure all intimate partner violence. But what I'm saying is, in my situation, like one of the most scariest moments I've ever had is from a police where they had assault rifles like pulled on me at a traffic stop, at a simple traffic stop when I was in college from both sides. And so the police have never made me feel safe. And I know that's probably the experience of a lot of marginalized survivors where it don't make us feel safe. And so there are other solutions. I believe that survivors being so close to the pain really can come together and envision these solutions. And it definitely doesn't look like more police, more courts, more prosecutions, prosecutors. It doesn't look like, money for that, but it really looks like money going into communities where communities can self-determine what those solutions look like on the ground.
We're going to be wrapping up in a second. I want to remind folks that you can ask questions if you like by dropping them into the chat. Amber, can you talk about how folks can get involved with the sort of work that you're doing? How can we make the world safer for survivors without having to engage with law enforcement?
Yeah. So I think, a few things just on the like who to follow and sort of supporting organizers. One is you can certainly follow the People's Coalition for Safety and Freedom, who's been dropping stuff in the chat. So it's People's PPLS_coalition. And maybe especially if you're in California, Illinois, North Carolina, Tennessee, or Texas, which are some main states that we're building with through our People's Process to reimagine how we can invest in safety and build up that infrastructure. If you're a public health worker or a health worker on here, certainly you can join Public Health Awakened, which is a national network of public health workers and organizations building power with folks. And so that's the account I'm on here, so PH Awakened. And then, also this work is about making sure that the folks who are directly impacted by this and our community members are centered in building the actual policy solutions that we need, and that we'll have to eventually go through some sort of policy process. So if you work for a local, state, tribal, federal government and want to sort of help us be on the inside, thinking about how to get this work moved forward and voted on as determined by us, we would love for you to reach out. My email is amber@humanimpact.org. And I think maybe just on the more community side, to exactly what Dawn was saying, I think that we need to be building up the skills and resources of our people to be able to be that good friend who can be the person that folks can go to for safety, right? And so that looks like small experiments. It looks like, sometimes they're not so small. I want to give a shout out to Mental Health First by Anti-Police Terror Project out in Oakland, where I live. They're also in Sacramento, which is an all volunteer, not at all connected to 911 emergency response system, including for folks who are experiencing intimate partner violence. So we can really be building on the kinds of programs, voluntary programs and treatment and services that are already out there.
Dawn, how can folks get involved with the work that you're doing?
Yes, so we actually have a initiative at Free Hearts called the Love and Justice Project, which is about organizing and advocating for criminalized survivors of sexual and domestic violence, which I will name is also a huge impact also of VAWA, is that survivors that have been criminalized, like if the police come, you never know who they're going to take. or if they're going, if you end up being a survivor that's also been criminalized, then all of the VAWA funding and everything else, you know, there's been people that we've been working with that as soon as they're considered, you know, criminalized or they have an ongoing case, that, oh, well, none of these resources are available for you. And so we have a lot of survivors that have been criminalized in our state. And I put our email in the chat. It's info@freeheartsorg.com. Just email us and let us know if you want to get involved. And, you know, and also there's Survived and Punished, and a lot of local organizations that are, you know, working to decriminalize surviving sexual and domestic violence, that are working to support survivors outside of the criminal legal system. And so look for those organizations in your local communities and get involved.
Something that comes up for me just listening to you now, that so often, you know, the hesitation or the discouragement for engaging with law enforcement comes from an abundance of concern for the assailant, you know, the loved one, the person who's done us harm, which is part of why Black and brown women have such complicated relationships. Part of the reason that we have such a complicated relationship to engaging with law enforcement, that we want to oftentimes protect people who've done us harm. But what you've mentioned is that it isn't simply the potential harm that could face, because you might not care if they come kill him, quite frankly, you know, depending on what's happened to you. But this is not necessarily about protecting the guilty party from harm or what comes of engaging with the system of law enforcement. It's what may happen to you as a survivor. Will you be believed? Will you be arrested yourself? Can you talk a little bit more about the experiences that survivors have engaging with law enforcement, where they're going thinking they're going to be helped and they're supported, and they find themselves, you know, being criminalized, perhaps worse?
Yes, definitely. So there's been plenty of times where a woman may call the police, and, you know, they come and then take her for a warrant, or just because they believe man in the situation. We also had a situation earlier this year where a person had reached out to us. They were trying to escape a relationship. We were working on some things with some of the organizations that help. Well, something happened, and she has a lot of children, and something happened, and she took his car and drove across state lines, and they like charged her with like grand theft auto. Like, she was just trying to get out with her children. We've also had situations to where a young person that had been raped went to like a place, sexual assault place, and literally told them, I don't want any police involved, really out of her own safety of not wanting this person to, you know, get in trouble, bond out, and then come after her because they were dangerous. And they promised that they would not like contact the police or get the police involved. And within like an hour or so of her leaving, the police were calling her. A detective was. We've also had a lot of situations in our state where survivors of domestic violence were their abuser did something to their child or even killed their child, and then they're as much criminalized by the system, and sometimes even more, because of failure to protect. And you should have, you know, done something about this. So there's so many different ways. And then once you've been criminalized, as I mentioned, basically none of the like mainstream or folks that are getting organizations that are getting this money, they're like, well, we can't do anything once you're a quote unquote defendant. And so and that's something also that's really hard when you're going in front of the courts, and also when you're going like post conviction in front of a parole board. It's just no recognition of what you survived, or the violence that you survived. And it's just, once you know, have been criminalized, it's just, you know, lock her up and throw away the key.
Amber, why do you think so many people still rely on law enforcement in these instances, considering how much we know about how ineffective they are at supporting survivors?
Yeah, I think that there are, you know, at least two distinct problems. One is people who do rely on police, and then is folks who get funneled to police. So sometimes police interaction, of course, is not voluntary. I'm kind of like the example that Dawn was sharing of the person in the shelter, right? You can be real explicit that you don't want police or prosecutors or any part of the criminal legal system involved, and yet societally there's a reliance on police, and so people end up getting funneled there. But for those who voluntarily choose to interact with the police, I think that there can be many reasons, right? So for one, we have to think about, you know, the relationship between narratives and policy and political education and people's individual experiences. And by far the dominant narrative in this country is that police are safety. I mean, the fact that they're called public safety departments is just laughable. At best for us, but is a strategic decision to try to sort of make equal police and safety. And so I think one is just, there's a way that because so much energy and the narrative and budgetary and policy fronts have been put into solidifying power of police, it's really stifled the imaginations of folks, right? Which I think for me is one of the most devastating things of working with survivors, because there's a way that it's gaslighting. It's telling a survivor that you will find justice, you will find healing if the person who hurt you is prosecuted and locked away. And that's just not true. I've never met a survivor who has felt justice or healing because the person who caused them harm was incarcerated. They may feel more safe knowing that they can't reach them, but why can't we invent and think of other ways to get somebody who needs a cool off period into a different place, right? And how can we sort of protect folks, you know, on the campus work that I used to do, for example, I strongly believe that sexual assault survivors on campuses should get priority choices for their classes, should get priority choices for their dormitories and housing. They should not have to live in a space or be in a classroom with someone who's caused them harm. And so we can have separation that is not carceral, that is not policing, and is not about punishment, but actually just about safety and what that survivor needs. And those needs may change over time, but I think that a big part of what the implications of this dominant narrative has been that we have a hard time imagining and believing that something else is possible. And I think there's a certain kind of vulnerability to saying, I want this thing that I don't think is going to be possible. It's, for me, sometimes it's easier if I know that need is not going to get met, then I don't even really want to voice it, because it would hurt too much to be able to communicate what is hurting me, what I need, and then be told I'm not going to be able to get it. So many ways that people might end up in a position where they are reliant on police or forced to rely on police, but those are some of the initial ones that come to mind in my experience.
Dawn, do you have any stories of interventions that have been successful where someone has been harmed and there's been a non-carceral approach to removing the victim from the person who's doing them harm, and also, you know, working towards some sort of path toward restorative justice? You know, because we know that prison doesn't rehabilitate, but we know that people that do harm need an intervention. Something has to happen or they're going to keep doing harm. So the question is, how do we keep them separate from the people that they have harmed or that they are likely to harm? And how do we prevent them from doing harm again?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. For one, I just want to say, for example, in my situation, the person had witnessed in their family violence all their life and hated it. That's why I was really shocked that ended up happening, because I was just I already knew how they felt about it because of what they dealt with within their family. And so I do think that, you know, that we need opportunities and spaces to be able to heal, and like you said, restorative and transformative justice as well. I've, I think this is an ongoing question with us. A lot of times we will do the sister circle route of just go get your sister, and but I do think it's a larger thing, because even I've seen, for example, restorative justice happen with surrogates, where somebody that has had harm, but not the person that harmed the person. Then, but it was kind of similar. Then a person that was harmed wanted to have a conversation, but not with the person that harmed them. That I saw something like that I thought was interesting. But a lot of times those things like that, it's like we haven't seen it in scale, and part of it is because there's so much financial funding, such as VAWA, that's overwhelmingly going to fund these carceral solutions, and not giving communities, giving survivors that funding to be able to envision, okay, what do we need? Let's create something, ourselves, that's outside of all of this. But really, as a country, we're investing in these solutions that are carceral, and we're not being given our own taxpayer money to really work on these solutions. So a lot of, probably what could be done is if we were able to take some of that money back, or all of it, and really be giving it to communities to be able to dream and to be able to imagine and be able to build our own ways to support survivors and to heal our communities.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Donna. I just wanted to jump in here. What both of you are speaking to is around being able to imagine new solutions, and then also resourcing those solutions, right? Because we pour a lot of resources into systemic, oppressive processes like incarceration, like law enforcement. And then we, as communities, when we're saying, hey, we actually need interventions that actually keep us safe, right? Actually make us feel supported, or actually resourcing the community's needs and priorities. And it's hard for us to develop even proof of concept if we don't have the investment in those resources. And so I just wanted to just highlight that by way of connecting the threads around, like, if we can't imagine it, then we can't see it, but we will not be able to see it if we don't fund it, right? And so just wanted to lift that up, and thank you both so much for the work that you're doing, and why we're sharing the platform, because we want more and more and more people to be able to hear and see that there are solutions, and that there are movements that are happening that we could be directing public dollars and resources to, because we are talking about public dollars and resources. This is the people's money that we're talking about as well.
Well, we are toward the end of our time, but I just wanted both Amber and Dawn to remind everyone how to follow and get involved with them and their organizations.
Yes, so you can check out Free Hearts at freeheartsorg.com. Also, you can check out National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls at nationalcouncil.us. And you can see how to contact us on there. Love to have you. And let's just stay connected. Let's just stay connected and figuring these things out. And I'll just also plug one other thing. We have the Free Her National Conference this year in Detroit. It's going to be amazing. It's in September the 30th through October the 2nd in Detroit, Michigan. And I can also, give me a second, I can drop the registration link in the chat.
Awesome.
Thank you.
I'm really trying to get out to Detroit for that. So you can follow all of HIP's platforms. We have links on our website. humanimpact.org might be the easiest. All of the handles are all different on each of the social media platforms, but we're on IG as PH Awakened. And you can follow the People's Coalition for Safety and Freedom. They've been chatting here. Their chat is pinned right now. It's PPLS_coalition. And I really also just want to take a moment to thank y'all so much. It's been such a pleasure getting to connect with you, Dawn, and spend time with you and just hear your brilliance. Always learning so much from you. And Jamila and Tia, so much gratitude to y'all. And also want to shout out the People's Coalition for Safety and Freedom team, who's behind so much of this work, especially Cam and Kamau. And, you know, other Jamila, who's also been being a big part of this, and just the rest of the crew at Build Power and beyond. Really appreciate y'all.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for this conversation on today. So necessary, so needed. Folks who in the chat, even if you just joined, please watch the replay. Please share it with others. We're going to continue. We started this Freedom Summer School. Other Jamila Brown, the Digital Strategies for People's Coalition. We started this summer school on Instagram Live because we wanted to figure out ways to highlight amazing work that's happening, the people's process that's taking place this summer and has been happening for a couple of years now, and now also to also just shine a light on the work and the perspectives. You know, we talk a lot about abolition and freedom and defunding the police, and you know, we want to give people an opportunity to learn even more about what exactly that means and why it's really necessary. And sharing your brilliance with us on Instagram Live is helping to do that. And Jamila, always thanking you for your perspective and for using and sharing your platform to highlight amazing work and help people think differently and critically, especially around issues that are happening with women, girls, and gender nonconforming people. Just wanted to express my gratitude to you for agreeing to be our host today. And thank you all so much. And I hope you have a great rest of your day, great rest of your weekend. It's Get Free Friday. So I hope you feel a little bit more inspired around ways that we can all get free together.
Thank you.
Let's get free, y'all.
Bye, y'all. Let's get free, y'all. Bye.